Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Captain Fi, the Financial Independence Podcast. G'day! Welcome to an episode of Captain Fi, the Financial Independence Podcast, where I open the cockpit to some of the best and brightest in personal finance, as well as those who've reached or are on their way to financial independence. Before we get started today, remember anything on the show is provided for general information only and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should always do your own research when making any financial decision.
On board today, we've got Nicholas G. Muscat, who might be better known as the Aussie Money Man. Our forecast today, financial literacy and online entrepreneurship. For those unfamiliar with the Aussie Money Man, Nick has been fiercely independent from a very young age. Nick saw his parents work tirelessly just to scrape by with the hope of eventually making it to retirement. He knew that wasn't the life for him. There must have been a better way, which led him to become interested in educating himself on finance and entrepreneurship. As a teenager, he began learning about personal finance and online business, and even started researching investing opportunities such as peer-to-peer lending. Armed with his knowledge, he's now started multiple online businesses, e-commerce stores, written ebooks, invested in the stock market and peer-to-peer lending, as well as making thousands per month in affiliate passive marketing. Nick created the Aussie Money Man website, as well as a YouTube channel to help spread the powerful message of financial literacy, and now has over 7,000 subscribers on his channel, all by the age of 20. So Nick, g'day, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
So first up, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. From the Blue Mountains, but I lived in Canberra for 12 months last year. I was between Canberra and Sydney, so yeah, so originally from Hawkesbury. But look, when it comes to what I do in my downtime and all that, I'm pretty into physical fitness. So since about 15, before then I did nothing. I was very inactive kid. I got really into fitness. So for the last 5 years of my life, I've been really into sort of your military style fitnesses. So your big tests and your cadence, push-ups, pull-ups, dips and all that stuff. I'm quite into science, so and IT. So that's sort of how I sort of approach my financial and business sort of approaches in life, and it's probably something we'll talk a bit about later. So I look a lot into psychology, science, ICT, mostly chemistry, that sort of stuff. I try to make time to learn a lot of piano theory, so I learned all these songs over my lifetime, but I keep going back and forth from learning the theory and forgetting it. So they tend to be sort of my hobbies, and obviously finance is probably a huge hobby as well. I mean, I'm always researching different investing opportunities and things like that as well.
Yeah, wow, Blue Mountains. Actually, I really love the Blue Mountains. I often get opportunities to fly around them. Absolutely stunning, really good to see the green returning back to the land. Obviously, there's some devastating bushfires earlier in the year. Look, let's get stuck in. So the first question I have for you, Nick, is I guess just trying to understand your journey. Did you have some kind of defining sort of light bulb moment when you knew that you sort of didn't want to pursue a conventional working career, say like your parents did?
That's an interesting one for me because I don't think I've ever sort of had that moment, and it's something I've discussed with my friends quite a lot, because the thing is I actually am not against a traditional working career, so there's a lot of careers that I actually would want to do simply because you can't do those sorts of things yourself. So I'm talking things like, your military, your firefighting, and even policing. They're all things I've actually been interested in since I was quite young. So I would dare say I'm not actually, it's not that I don't want that. I think for me, it's always just been a case of wanting to have the option not to have to work a career. It's always just been about to have that choice. Even if I never used that choice and found a career I loved, it was just having the option to go, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a unique one there. Yeah.
Mate, that's actually, like, I think that's one of the core principles of this whole FIRE movement is, what they call it, the FU money, having that, that backup, that choice, meaning, you don't have to trade, you don't have to trade that time for money. Like you're doing the job because you love it. Talking about creating that option with investing, you need to start somewhere. It's pretty amazing that you started so early. Like, some people might even be intimidated by that. You told me just before we started recording that you started your YouTube channel when you were 13. Like, when I was 13, I can't even remember what I was doing. I'm pretty sure I was trying to blow things up and ride my bicycle around at night time. I had no idea about money. And what were the first sort of steps that you took towards financial literacy and self-education?
Sure. So I will mention the YouTube channel I started isn't the one I'm running now. You can see my first video on Aussie Money Man was uploaded like a year and a half ago. But it was a sort of gaming and tech review channel, so I reviewed like microphones and taught people how to set up their, microphone setups and all that. I think because when I was 13, and I've thought about this quite a lot with my friend, because it's interesting, because your mind really is nothing like what it is, when you're an adult. When you're 13, 16, 17, not so much. I haven't changed much since then, but at 13, it was more so, I was just trying to make money. I didn't understand the concept of investing in anything yet. When I got into investing and all that was when I was 16, 17. So once I finished school, that's when I realized I have all this time and I can get into investing. And I think the first thing I read was actually from Noel Whittaker. And it was basically him talking about compound interest. And when I found out about it, I was like, holy crap, and there was all these articles and all these people saying, imagine if you started at 18. And I was sitting there thinking, well, I'm 17, so I don't need to imagine, I can do that, right? And that's sort of when I started, and that's when I started researching, namely P2P lending, as you mentioned. That was the first thing I sort of jumped into. And from there it just took off. I just found myself, just watching so much content, reading, asking people questions, reaching out to anyone I knew that might have a knowledge of this sort of stuff. And then that's sort of how I started, really.
Yeah, it reminds me of, what's the quote? Like, the best time to start investing is 50 years ago, and the second best time is today. It's like a bit of a superpower that, that you started so young. And a lot of people might feel, I might have missed the boat. It's too late for me. But the most important thing to remember is, the second best time to start investing is today, and it's never too late. If you're listening and you feel like you've missed the boat, you definitely haven't. Listening to you talk about discovering compound interest, it almost sounds like, that's when the pennies drops. When I personally discovered the FIRE movement and realized that it was a thing you could actually do, that you could earn some money, live below your means, and invest it, and eventually the passive income returns off that portfolio could actually cover your cost of living. I was like, wow, blew my mind. Whether you do actually, choose to leave your job or not, the fact that you've got that backup option is a massive thing. Again, we talked about the FU money. It gives you so much freedom and ability to determine which career path. Like you mentioned earlier, you're not against a traditional career, and having financial freedom would allow you to pursue, like a military career or a career in some other form of service. Yeah, it opens up so many doors. So have you read much on the FIRE movement, or is that something you're interested in?
No, good question. So I have read a fair bit on, I wouldn't say a huge amount, because I think for me, because I'm not even 100% sure of the reason, but I think perhaps because I started so early, it's always just been something that I've just sort of expected to happen, and therefore haven't felt maybe perhaps a requirement to read a lot into. But it's definitely something I'm interested in. Like, it's definitely something that I suppose I'm striving for as an option, if that makes sense. But like I definitely haven't gone as sort of full into it as, a lot of other people have.
Your main goal with respect to investing, you would like to build up a form of passive income to supplement you, to allow you to then work a career that you're passionate about without having to worry about the finance?
Yeah, well, that's one, like, that's definitely one huge part of it. Yeah. And the other part is perhaps I choose not to work it, then I want to, have, the ability to do that too. So yeah, pretty much that, or anything I want to do, because the fact of the matter is that there's so many things I want to do that I'm not sure which one I'm going to take. So obviously if I've got my financial, side of set up, well, that allows me, as you mentioned earlier, to take a year off and go through the recruitment process for something that takes a year, or perhaps decide I want to go for a different business venture and startups. So yeah, basically just leaving my options open. Like, I just don't have a specific goal, I suppose, that I'm aiming for. I think I did at one point, I was like, oh, I'll become a millionaire by 25 or whatever. But, that's not really what it's about. It's just about having the freedom, to change your mind, really.
Freedom is probably the big word there. Freedom and choice. I guess arguably a core step in investing, or the first step really is to generate some capital, right? You need some money to start investing in the first place. How did you start out earning money to start investing, and how have those income streams changed over time?
Awesome. That's a really good question. So the first way I made money was when I got my first part-time job. So I was working, I got my job at 13, and it was just sort of cash. It was $8 an hour. So I did heaps of shifts of that. And I eventually started working at McDonald's, and I did that for like 3 years, sort of part-time at school. So essentially, initially I was working jobs. And obviously I did have that, YouTube channel, which was making some income as well, although it was definitely, very small amount, right? So, I got my like first sponsorship and stuff, and seemed like a lot of the time, but it really wasn't. So I suppose it started primarily employment. And then when I got out of school, obviously I took up some, different jobs with, different, governments, so state and federal, and that paid, a lot more, and that was like, a big step up. And then obviously I had my businesses ramping up in the background, because I was running those part-time in the background throughout all of this. So today, obviously it's purely business. So essentially, I started with jobs when I was 13, and the way it's changed is it's gone essentially from employment income to business income. And also another big change has been active to passive income. It's gone massively from, 100% essentially, active income, packing fruit, packing potatoes was a big thing I did, to basically, for example, writing and releasing an ebook, and letting that get a sale even, once a week, and paying me that way. So that's probably been, the biggest ways it's changed.
Fantastic. So I guess you started out much like everyone else, young, in school, part-time job, earning some cash, being careful, stashing it away, working your way up to a high-paying job, and then working on your side businesses and hustles on the side, mate. Yeah, that's great. That's a pretty good great. So, like, with the passive income, so how does that work? Like, I'd obviously love to talk a bit more about the YouTube stuff in a minute, but is it enough to live off yet, or what's your goal with the passive income? Is your goal for it to support your lifestyle?
Yeah, good question. So fortunately, yes, it has reached a point where I can live off it quite comfortably, particularly because I don't spend much money. So like, people do need to know that when I say I can live off my income, I don't spend much money at all. Like, I'm very, very frugal, like many of your watchers likely are who follow the FIRE movement. But it's something to take into account. And my goal with that, really, I've got a specific figure in my head that I've always sort of wanted to reach, and that was $10,000 a month, and I've upped that now to 30, sort of long term. So that's in the next 5 years. And yeah, it is to sort of to greatly exceed my expenses. And the reason for that, again, is just choices, and having the ability to even, at one point go, I want to pursue, I don't know, the piano full time and do that for a year, and be able to do that because, the amount of money I've made has exceeded so much, and I've saved so much, and I've invested so much that I can afford to do that. So really it is just sort of being in excess of what I'm, reasonably going to spend by a decently large factor to, again, allow me just to have those options. So that's basically my goal. And it's ambitious, surely, but, I think it's sort of not unrealistic. So.
Mate, I think, $10,000 a month passive income at 20 is pretty bloody amazing. And from what you're talking about, having that freedom and time to pursue, it sounds really similar to the sort of philosophy behind the FIRE movement. It's just pretty amazing that you've, I guess, been able to use online commerce, entrepreneurship, and your business skills to achieve that income much, much quicker than, say, your traditional FIRE plan of working an active income for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, investing 80% of it in index funds, and then living off the dividends. You've actively created businesses and products, and you're able to use that to fund your early retirement, if you want to call it that. So that's pretty impressive. So I guess once you've earned the income, and you sort of alluded to it earlier, the next step is to actually save it. So this is where a lot of people tend to go wrong, and they can lose it pretty quick, right? Easy come, easy go. I've seen you produce a lot of really great content on essentially stoicism or minimalism, it might be called as well, when it comes to one's personal life and spending habits, such as why you downgraded to the Google Pixel 1, some frugal living arrangements, and just generally being very mindful about one's spending and acting quite mindful and deliberately. What are some of the motivations for you to live below your means, and what are a couple of your top tips on how to do so?
Yeah, sure. So you've sort of hit the nail on the head with all of those. It's definitely where I'm coming from, from minimalism and all that, and it's definitely my mindset. And look, so my big motivations for doing this. So the first one's the obvious one, which is the less you spend, the more you can save, the more you can invest, and the quicker you can reach that sort of point of freedom or financial independence, which really go hand in hand, in a lot of ways. And so there's that. And then there's a big one for me is simplicity. I do tend to overwhelm myself with a lot of different things. So I do find the less things I have, the less clutter I have, the less, time I'm spending, going, oh, I've made $100, I can go buy a new, I don't know, jacket or whatever it is. It's just a thing I don't have to worry about. So it's simplicity. It's gratitude. A big one for me is being grateful for what I already have. And the truth is I'm truly satisfied with what I have, whether that's my Google Pixel 1 or my $700 car. I'm happy with it. So for me, it's just a matter of if I can be happy with that, that's great for me. And obviously it has all the other benefits. So I think just being grateful for what I have is a huge thing for me, really. So I think that's some of them, and there's probably a lot more I'm forgetting about here, but yeah, so there's a lot of motivations to live below your means. I think it's huge. I think another one actually is you avoid the common mistake of buying things to sort of fill a hole. So a lot of people buy things to fill, the holes that everyone has in life, right? And everyone's always chasing something, and we need to do that. I think that's human nature, right? As I mentioned, I'm quite interested in psychology and all that as well. So for me, it's just sort of avoiding that issue, because I think once you do it once, you keep doing it and you want more and more, and before you know it, you're trying to get a Rolls Royce, which, by the way, I do love, but you can see the message there. Now, when it comes to the top tips on how to do it, I'm trying to think the best thing. I think, the answer really would be only, and this is something I just said quite a bit on my YouTube channel, was probably be only buy things if they're going to offer great value or tremendous value. And then, okay, well, what's tremendous value? And I think the answer to that is it going to save you money, or is it going to make you really bloody happy in the long term? And I think in the long term is important, because buying, if I were to go buy the latest phone, I'd probably be pretty happy with it for a week. But then after that, it's sort of like, so I think there's a lot of other things you could do with your time, with your money, to make you a lot more happy in the long term. And that usually is things like learning a skill or doing something you've always wanted to do, learn breakdancing or something, whatever it is that you've always wanted to do. So that's probably my biggest tips. Just before you buy something, run it through that test. I mean, that's what I do. And that's something I've just sort of come up with. And I'm sure 1,000 people come up with better ways. But that's what I do.
I read an article from Mr. Money Moustache. I think it was called Hacking Hedonistic Adaptation. And he talks about exactly what you just mentioned with the iPhone. You buy the latest iPhone, it's great, you really like it for a week or two, and then it just becomes normal. So he talked a little bit about some tips and tricks in there about how you can make sure you're getting the most happiness out of your purchases. And you're dead right. You got to make sure either it's really good value, or it's going to make you quite happy. I know personally, like I'll sit on a purchase for sometimes months or even years, and if I still want it at the end of that period, then hey, I'll get it. But it's certainly just buying things for the sake of it, it just doesn't make any sense, does it? So, yeah, no, really, really good advice there. And, if you're doing that and you're being very mindful with your purchases, there's almost no need to have a budget or even track your expenses because you're just going to automatically do it properly.
Well, that's it, and that's brilliant. I'm so happy you brought that up because people ask me all the time, like, what's your budget? Like, surely you have a budget, right? Because knowing me, you're the Aussie Money Man. And sometimes I feel bad about it. Sometimes I think, crap, should I have a budget? But you're right. That's the conclusion I eventually came to, was exactly that. You don't need a budget because you're doing it automatically anyway. And, having a budget is one of those things that people hate having because it is. It's complicated. It's spreadsheets. No one wants that. So if you can avoid it by doing that, it's a win-win-win, So, yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Absolutely. So I guess the final piece of the puzzle, or in this finance loop, is investing. So we talked about earning the money. We talked about some ways to save it, and the final step is to invest it. So I know you've written extensively about peer-to-peer lending. You've reviewed a lot of the different platforms. And you've also been actively investing in the stock market since you're a teenager. So what led you to start investing? And I guess it's a massive question, but what is your investment style and your investment strategy at the moment?
Yep, awesome. Okay, no, great question. I'm actually happy to talk about that because it's something I haven't spoken about much at all, and I really, really do want to start talking about. So look, how I started was pretty much from that reading about compound interest. I read another one after the Noel Whittaker one. It was called like the Magic Train or something. And it's based off like this book, and it was just this little article about it, talking about compound interest and the power of, putting money on this train each time it goes around each year. It was, so the analogy for it. And, once I, sort of read that, I had that light bulb moment that you mentioned. It's sort of like, wow. And then you're like, I need to get involved in this. I don't want to wait a day, I don't want to wait a minute. So that's sort of what made me start. And my investment style and strategy. So essentially, it's changed a lot, okay? And let me know if you want me to run you through it all, but I'll just quickly tell you what it is now, so this doesn't go on forever, and I can elaborate, if that's something you reckon will offer value to all the listeners here. And essentially what that is now is I've got my sort of what I call my speculative investments, so they're your P2P lendings, and your sort of micro investing apps and everything like that. I consider them a bit more speculative. And my sort of main investment at the moment is actually just investing in low-cost index funds, but international low-cost index funds with 50% of my holdings hedged, 50% of them not hedged. And when I say internationally, I'm talking emerging markets and not emerging markets, and I'm talking small, mid-cap, and large-cap stocks, so everything. So basically, I'm not value investing, I'm not dividend investing. I'm chucking my money in the entire stock market, and that's basically my strategy. Now, when it comes to my style is investing for the very long term. So when I invest, I'm putting it in, at least at the moment, for what I like to think is 40 years. So I think I'm going to put it in there, and I'm not going to touch it for 40 years. And the other part of, I guess, what would fit into style is my aggressiveness. I'm very aggressive. So I'm 100% stocks. Besides obviously my P2P lending and things like that, but I don't, no bonds, nothing like that. I'm basically what you'd consider a highly aggressive investor. So obviously the more stocks you have, we know, from the data that what that means is you're a lot more likely to have huge downs, 40, 60%. We're seeing that right now with the 40%. But you're also over the long term, and from what we know, statistically and historically, will return, bigger returns. But you'll also experience a lot more volatility than someone who has, 40% bonds and 60% stocks or something like that.
Yeah, wow, mate. I think we possibly have a very similar investing style and approach then. I am similar to you in that I'm also almost 100% stocks. I do keep a small cash cushion, like an emergency fund. It'd definitely be 90 or 95% stocks at the moment, including superannuation, which of course is invested in stocks and stock annuities.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm the same. I love ETFs. Particularly, I love the ultra low cost ETFs. You mentioned you invest primarily in these sort of index funds. What portion do you keep that in then between your index investments and your speculative sort of stock picking fund investments?
Sure thing. So a few things there. I will mention I do have an emergency fund as well, and I, again, not financial advice. None of this is financial advice, of course. But yeah, I'm big on that. So I personally, I'm pretty frank about it. I just keep $10,000, same as you, because I consider myself to have relatively stable income, and therefore doesn't need to be too big. But that's what I keep in cash always, no matter what. So that's a high interest savings account. I think it's with BOQ at the moment. So I keep that. Now, getting back to your actual question, yeah, it'd be like 95%. So just trying to do the math in my head real quick, which I'm not the best at. I'm going to say I'm going to say about like 95% is in index funds.
Yeah. Okay. I actually started trying to stock pick, and I had some really awesome ones, and I had some not so awesome ones. I was, following the Barefoot Blueprint, and I think the Motley Fool. And when I consider all the gains and the losses, and then I pay tax on obviously the capital gains and that kind of crap. I underperformed the index, not by a lot, but I certainly realized that, hey, for me personally, I'm just going to stick my money in this index fund and these LICs and just let them churn out dividends for me. And when dividends come, I'll rub my hands together and probably invest most of it, reinvest it. But yeah, awesome. So speaking about other forms of investments, obviously you are quite self-invested in your businesses, which are earning a fantastic return for you. But what about other classes? So you mentioned that you don't have any bonds, and I agree, I don't either. We're both very aggressive investors in terms of pretty much all equities.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of get the impression you probably wouldn't own precious metals then. So what about property? Are you interested in real estate at all?
Look, I think my opinion on real estate is essentially that if you're investing in such a way that you are taking out, mortgage and you're essentially leveraging it and you do your research, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it's cheap debt. That's the only real advantage to property. Every other advantage to property, at least in Australia, almost, is basically a fallacy as far as the research that I've done. So if I were to invest in property, it would be buying, I'd go buy 5 properties and put, 40 grand deposit on all of them, or, lower a little bit higher respective, obviously to the price of the property. But I wouldn't invest in property in the sense that, with the plan to sort of pay it off, and, sort of own in that sort of way. So the only way I would do it is to sort of get cheap debt and sort of be super aggressive in my investment approach. So yes and no.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it there. The cash on cash returns due to gearing or, taking debt for a mortgage for an investment property is really, from what I've read, from my research, is the only real winner. I'm still learning more about property investing. I'm currently building a duplex project up on the East Coast with the intent to have an interest-only loan. And have it cash flow positive, with, any capital gains as sort of the cherry on the top, so to speak. Yeah, I agree. You really need to do your research. With that being said, do you have any plans to go out and get some rentals?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So it's something I'm torn between, mostly because I do plan on moving overseas. So that has obviously a lot of impacts on your tax residency, which is a huge reason I'm leaving. So most people think their biggest expense is accommodation. I quickly find out that it's actually tax for a lot of people. So for me, trying to get rid of that biggest expense is, okay, well, let's go live somewhere else, right? And, there's nothing stopping you from doing that sort of beyond still being a tax resident here. So that's my biggest issue there. But if I were to decide to stay in Australia for whatever reason, 100%, I probably would, because again, property is actually worse than stocks when it comes to its overall returns, unless if you're taking leverage, and you can't take leverage in stocks in the same way you can in property by any means. There's no practical way to take leverage in stocks like you can in property. So maybe.
Interesting. that concept of moving overseas or geographic arbitrage, I think some people call it. It's brilliant. I've got friends, all over the world, Southeast Asia and Europe, mostly. And I mean, Europe can be quite expensive, but particularly Southeast Asia, it can be incredibly cheap to live there. And I spend a lot of my time when I work. I travel the world, flying to airports all around. And I'm always amazed by just how cheap the cost of living can be when you are in places like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines. You do get a lot of value for your dollar there.
Absolutely. And even Eastern Europe, I mean, basically your options essentially are, once you consider standard of living, is essentially, your Southeast Asia and your Eastern Europe. And the thing is, it's not even just cost of living. You look at tax, a lot of these countries have really favorable taxation systems, some for businesses, some for individuals, some for both, some for none, but yeah.
Wow. So what's on your short list of potential destinations?
Oh, Jesus, heaps. That's a video that I said I'd make. I made this video like while I never retire in Australia, which was obviously, as you can imagine, quite controversial. And I said I'd make a video talking about the country, so I've got to do that. But for me, I was more interested in a few countries in Eastern Europe. So there's some pretty attractive places there, but like there's a few countries you mentioned as well. So you obviously Indonesia's and stuff as well that are attractive. Even Malaysia is really good for business. We'll see.
Awesome, mate. Well, I'm definitely keen to watch the video when it comes out.
Yeah.
So, look, I guess that leads perfectly into my next question, which was going to be retirement accounts. So most countries, have a form of tax-sheltered investment account to cover your cost of living in retirement. So in Australia, we have superannuation. It's kind of like the American 401k scheme. What's your opinion on superannuation, and do you contribute more or max out your concessional cap?
Sure, yeah, really, really good question. And the answer is yes. Just to sort of make it short and sweet, I max it out every time in every way I possibly can. I think that in order to be able to outperform the tax savings, right, depending on obviously your marginal tax rate and all those other things, is very unlikely. So it's very unlikely you're going to, be able to beat that 15% tax rate versus, the 30, 40, 50% you might have depending on, again, which tax bracket you fit into. So yeah, I'm a big fan of what that can offer for most people.
Superannuation, you start contributing a bit extra now, you're going to benefit from those tax savings, and that compound interest turns out to be a lot of dollars in your retirement. Now, we mentioned earlier we were going to talk about your YouTube channel. I'm a massive fan, Aussie Money Man. You got a lot of really great videos, and actually it was a bit of part of the motivation behind me posting these podcasts up on YouTube, by the way. You mentioned you started early doing with a gaming review channel. So can you talk a little bit about how you actually got started and what your first few steps were?
Absolutely. Firstly, I appreciate you saying that. That's very humbling, and that motivates me to sort of keep at it. Regarding how I actually started, I think I just saw other people doing it. So there was other people, PewDiePie, how he got started was gaming. And then I eventually realized, gaming was decently oversaturated. It was more so a gamble than a business, as in, if you become successful, make money from it. So then I moved into tech reviews because I knew that I was really into, IT, and I was, doing these, at the time, what I thought as a 13-year-old to be complicated, setups and things, of microphones and how to record the Xbox One without buying an Elgato because, a lot of people can't afford to buy a $300 Elgato when they're a kid and wanting to record their gaming. So I started doing videos like that, and I realized that was getting a lot of attention. People weren't really doing that. And then throughout high school, I always knew I wanted to sort of get back into YouTube. The only reason I actually stopped around 16 is because I broke both my wrists on a motorbike. So I couldn't record for like a year, and by the time it was back, I was in year 11 and I was really into school academically, so I was otherwise sort of occupied. But the second I left school, like literally the second I finished, I think it was November 6th, 2017, I got straight back into YouTube. So the way I got back into it is I did all my research on P2P lending. I was reading all the PDSs, so that's product disclosure statements. I was ringing the investment fund managers and asking them questions, and I figured I've spent 3 weeks doing research on this. I'm going to make this into a blog post. I'm going to make this into a YouTube video. And that's how Aussie Money Man started, is I shared that research. And, it didn't get a lot of views, but the people who did watch it appreciated it. I think it's got a few thousand views. So then I started just sort of doing that with pretty much and that's pretty much what all my videos are. Is just me sharing my research and my journey. And that's essentially how I started. So, I guess firstly it was just copying other people, and then it was sort of how can I differentiate myself to actually make this profitable, because the gaming part was not ever profitable. And yeah, that's essentially my journey.
What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced with YouTube and content creation?
Sure. There's quite a lot. I think a big one I face is, so your usual quality versus quantity. So a lot of people, even in the finance space, will upload, daily or every 2-3 days. Because of the nature of my, channel where, I've got these really strict values and all that of being holistic. So basically what that might mean is if I'm going to cover investments, I've got to cover it bloody well. Like I've got to have done my research. I've got to have read the studies. I've got to have read all the PDSs, for example, the product disclosure statements, the terms and conditions, which basically means, do I want to sort of tone that back a bit and upload more, to build essentially business quicker, because, that's what YouTube is, depending on how you treat it. Or at least it can be, there's the potential to be. Or, should I keep up what I'm doing and, upload not too often? Because obviously uploading once a week is 52 videos a year, and that's difficult when I'm going up against people uploading 250 times a year. So I think that's been a huge issue, do I upload more or do I, there's been quite a few, but I think that's probably been one of the big ones.
I've heard you can monetize YouTube and actually get some revenue back for the time that you spend creating those videos. Has that been a part of your sort of online entrepreneurship strategy? And is it worth it? Like, just how much time do you spend preparing the videos, and then how much does it make?
Yeah, no, great question. It's sort of something that has to be unraveled. It can be quite complicated, but like the short answer is yes. Yes, you can make money. Yes, you can make a lot of money. The long answer is it depends, what niche are you in? What sort of videos are you making? Are you relying on YouTube income directly? So what they call YouTube AdSense, so the money YouTube's paying you, or are you relying more on affiliates, which again comes back to your niche, and it can be quite complicated. My personal situation, I'm lucky. So essentially the highest paying niches or topics or areas that you talk about, love or makeup or finance in my case, is finance. So essentially it goes law, finance and everything else. So basically what that means is the amount that YouTube will pay you for in order to run videos run ads on your videos, is quite high. So it can be as high as $200 per 1,000 views, although that's not common, but I've got a few videos that get that, right? And again, they don't get a lot of views, but there's a potential to, right? So this is what I mean when I say it can be done. The other way that you can make income off and make a lot is what I mentioned earlier, which is affiliates. So that's partnering. So let's say I do a video about a bank. I could, in theory, partner with that bank, and that bank could pay me to make that video, or pay me based on how many views I get, or pay me based on how many people sign up, and all things like that. So it's definitely doable, and it's definitely something I'm trying to work in. So I've spoken about that a bit on my YouTube channel, is I'm trying to make Aussie Money Man more of a huge part of my business journey, because I bloody love doing it. It's a lot of fun, and it essentially allows me to do what I was doing anyway as my business. You know what I mean? It's a win-win, really. It would be awesome. So that is something I'm trying to do, and is something I am doing. I mean, it does make money, not a huge amount. And I think the last time I updated my viewers on YouTube with my income, it was about $250 a month, which is not a lot of money. Like that's from ad revenue only, not including affiliates. And now it's doubled to about 500 over the span of like 2 months. So it gets there. And I think there's a YouTuber called Aussie Wealth Creation. So his name's Brandon. He's a lot bigger. So he started about a year or two earlier than me. And he at one point was saying he was making $3,000 a month passively from ad revenue. So yes, yeah, that sort of shows you the potential. And there's big YouTubers out there, American ones, that are making 170 grand a month in ad revenue alone. So it can be done.
I'm just running the numbers here, and if like $500 a month is pretty bloody good, and the equivalent to, if you were to earn that income from an ETF portfolio dividend, or using the safe 4% withdrawal rate, that's equivalent to $150,000 worth of index fund stock.
Yeah.
So, wow, it just goes to show how that entrepreneurship can really accelerate your passive income. And look, I just ran the numbers for Brandon, Aussie Wealth Creation. If he was making $3,000 a month, that's equivalent to $900,000 worth of stock using the 4% rule. That's very close to a lot of people's FI number or FI goal. Wow. Hey, maybe I should start making YouTube videos.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, that's the thing. I mean, like, the potential's there, and I tell people all the time, like, and it doesn't have to be, like, a lot of people go, oh, I don't know a lot about finance, and I'm like, well, you can, like, anyone can learn it, right? So there's that. But there's also the fact that everyone already has an interest, already has an area that they know more about than most people. So I always say to people, I'm like, go talk about it. Like, if you love tennis or tanks or cars or whatever it is, like, you can bloody do it. Like, yeah, sure, you might need a bit of a differentiating factor or, you know, some sort of, you know, something that makes you different, an economic moat, you know, we might say in the investment community. But that's doable. I mean, like me, my biggest difference was just, you know, there's already finance YouTubers was to be like, well, I'm an Australian finance YouTuber and I actually read studies, you know, so that was my trying to be different thing. And, you know, that's worked relatively well so far. We'll see how we go. But it's definitely doable and pretty much everyone can do it, you know, because everyone has something they're good at. Cooking, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are really into that and really good at that.
Okay, so it can be quite lucrative, but it's probably also worth pointing out that, you know, quality videos can take quite a bit of time to produce. How long would it take you to produce a video?
Fantastic question. Yeah, so absolutely. And again, this greatly depends on your niche, which is why, you know, one of the many reasons I mentioned that. So if you're one of those YouTubers that go out there and, I think a good example is, I can't remember his name, the one that just throws eggs and stuff, is the Australian guy. How to Basic. You know, if you've got a YouTube channel like that, it's going to take you a few bloody hours. So, but if you're someone like, you know, me who's doing, you know, days, weeks of research and literally reading through, you know, academic studies of how the stock market's performed, it could take longer. So it depends. For me personally, if it's a direct research video, it might take me many days, many weeks of research, although the actual recording of the video and the editing of it will take me 3 hours. The research aspect of it might take me more. But if I'm just making a video, and I have done this in the past, explaining how I save money personally, that might take me 5 hours max, because all I've got to do is sort of write down and, you know, take a bit of time to think about all the different ways I actually save money, you know, because sometimes you do a lot of things subconsciously, you know, in life, obviously, and write those down. That might take me a lot longer. So basically it varies, can be a long time, can be, you know, a short time. Some of them pay off a lot better, so I might do a video that takes me 5 hours and somehow it gets a lot of views and I make a lot of money. And then there's other videos I put a lot of research into, and get 1,000 views and no one really enjoys it to the extent that they're, you know, giving me money for it or whatever. So
yeah, fair enough. So it's it certainly strikes me as something you have to be passionate about.
Oh yeah.
And you're not gonna, you know, become a millionaire overnight. But if it's something that you are passionate about creating and spreading the word and the content and the lessons, then there is the ability for you to be sort of compensated for your time. And, you know, if you are doing it really, really well, then, you know, you can make a living out of it. So yeah, okay, interesting. I think that's a really good description of how it all works. I've kind of heard, like, in websites, SEO is kind of the name of the game for people that are wanting to sort of build a blog or a website. What kind of SEO can you use on your Aussie Money Man blog and YouTube channel to sort of help build its ranking?
Sure thing. So I started the website before the YouTube channel, and that was sort of my initial thing. But when I found out that they're, you know, saying that by like 2021 or something, like 80% of media is going to be on video, I sort of ditched it in a sense. And I still have the website there clearly, and, you know, you guys can check that out should you wish. But I've more moved to YouTube. Now, I was into SEO at the time, you know, so things like your backlinks are huge, you know, your keywords, you know, what's in the header. Version of different areas and all that. But right now, I've just got someone doing it for me, fortunately. So I've, you know, sort of got an agency doing it now. But yeah, when it comes to blogging, SEO is huge. You know, there's still a lot of people making money from blogging. It's certainly not dead. But getting into it as a starter now is very, 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 very difficult. And because, you know, I believe, and, you know, the data seems to indicate, you know, therefore I believe that we are moving to video, I have moved away from it. So I definitely wouldn't I definitely don't have all the information I used to have in my head about SEO and all that. So.
Okay, what are some parallels to YouTube? Like, how do you increase your viewership?
Sure. Well, yeah, you're right. YouTube does have SEO just in the same way. I mean, all it is search engine optimization, and I think YouTube is the second biggest search engine at the moment. So yeah, things like keywords and all that used to be important. From all the research I've done, the most important things seem to be your title and thumbnail. So, capturing, enticing, interesting, and your descriptions. Your description essentially acts, as the place for your keywords now. So your actual keywords don't seem to matter too much. YouTube keeps changing their algorithm. So yeah, they're the big things essentially for SEO from what I can find out. Now YouTube's pretty quiet about their algorithm, as is Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and all of them. But yeah, that's the sort of information that they've at least alluded to that, the general consensus seems to sort of point to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, clearly you've read a lot of information and books on entrepreneurship, business, investing, and self-development in general.
Yeah.
If you could boil it down to probably your three most powerful or influential books or even lessons, what would they be?
Brilliant question. Okay, so I do tend to find I'm reading a lot more sort of self-development books than anything. So I did read a fair few business books initially, sort of got off that. Finance books, I've read a lot on value investing, and that's something I'll talk about at the end if I get a chance as well. And I got off that. So probably self-development. Look, now when it comes to finance, if you're sort of new to finance and all that, obviously your Barefoot Investor, your Money Made Simple by Noel Whittaker, your Rich Dad Poor Dad are all really good to start. If you want to do self-development, I really like Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. The Slight Edge is a really bloody good one. That is basically the philosophy that I think I've used to achieve everything I've been able to achieve, is essentially what's talked about in The Slight Edge, which would lead me then to say, if I were to say sort of biggest lesson, as you mentioned, it'd probably be just the fact that the same spiral that we've all unfortunately seen, happen to others, or maybe even ourselves in our life, that leads people to a really bad place in their life, they lose their job and then they start drinking and then, they start spending all their money and then they have no money or hardly any money because they don't have their job and they just go in this spiral, works in the same way in reverse. Meaning once you start to do those little good things each day, you get up early, you read in the morning, you exercise each day, etc., that compounds in the same way in the reverse direction. And before you know it, you've achieved things that a year before, 2 years before, whatever it has to be, you just thought were impossible. Because, I wasn't a very confident kid, for example, and the changes that I'll even be able to see with my short time frame, obviously I'm quite young, so maybe this will be even bigger to me when I'm older. Has just been monumental because of that simple fact that the reverse is true. That negative spiral happens on the upside as well. So I think that's a huge lesson that if people see that, wow, because for a lot of people it's how am I going to get to this, whether it be finance or whatever it is in life, but they don't realize that it compounds just as it does in the opposite direction. And I think as humans, it's a lot easier to see the opposite side of that and see how quickly you can find your life tumbling than it is to see how quickly you can see yourself just shooting for the stars. So that's probably my biggest sort of lesson I think I've learned.
Okay, and all right, so the Slight Edge, and I think you mentioned as well the Barefoot Investor in there.
Yes, yeah, Barefoot Investor. So that's obviously great for you. If you're new to financing, you're not an expert by any means. That's real good to get yourself started. And really jump into the financial sort of literacy space, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And another one I heard you mention, which is one of my favourites. It's a bit of a contentious choice. Some people either really love him, some people hate him, but that's of course Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Nick, fantastic recommendations, mate. It's actually that positive spiral. And the Slight Edge you mentioned. I haven't actually read that book before. I've actually written it down right now, and it's something that I'm going to be putting on my list. Yeah. So it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today. What are the 3 tips if you could go back in time and tell yourself?
Sure thing. All right. I'm going to say one of the big ones I'd probably do firstly is just not to worry about working as much. When I was a kid, so both then and in the future. So that'd be a big one. The second one would be to start a business earlier and concentrate on that more earlier. Because again, the whole reason I wasn't doing that is to concentrate on academics, which partly was, due to a job and partly due to interest. But either way, I probably shouldn't have been doing that. And the third one would be to go full time with my business earlier. So I kept, it was a huge issue I had where I was just like, even though yes, I was enjoying the job and all that, it was a big reason I was staying, amongst others, was sort of the whole, well, this income's guaranteed and my business income isn't. But now I realize, obviously, more so than ever, that the sky's the limit when it comes to a business, depending on, the industry, as long as it's scalable, your chances of getting, a pay rise, so to speak, when running a business is a lot bigger and likely to happen a lot quicker than it is in a job. So that'd probably be the 3 tips. So don't worry about working a job now and in the future as much, at least. Start a business earlier and start running that business full time earlier.
Is there anything else you want to have a chat about today that we haven't mentioned?
If I could, I don't want to make this too long, but there was 3 things that sort of came up during the little chat here that I wanted to mention. So what those are, first one is I'm completely on board with what you said. I didn't want to make the comment earlier and sort of interrupt the flow, but when you mentioned, about, starting now, not to feel bad about that, that's so true. And the way I look at it is I saw this thing once, it was on Facebook, of all places, I know there's a lot of crap on Facebook, but it was essentially something like, if you had like 100 grand and someone stole, 5 grand of it or something, are you going to be sit there and be depressed about that? And the answer is no. So I think that the same thing applies there when it comes to investing. It's like, well, if you start now, you're going to have something. And if you just keep waiting, you're just going to have less or nothing if, you ultimately don't invest. So I'm completely on board with that. Just start now. Like, don't feel bad about it. There's 1,000 things that I could feel bad about and that everyone could feel bad about in life. You just got to go for it. The second thing I wanted to mention is about FIRE, because obviously we went back and forth about FIRE quite a bit. And I think the reason for that is because I never found FIRE so much as FIRE found me. I think what happened essentially is I was doing these things thinking I was like, all amazing and innovative. And there was this whole community of people doing it anyway. So I think essentially I even maybe today don't realize how much what I'm doing is just FIRE. Because, I've sort of, I suppose, forged my own path, to something that already was created. So, I think that's something interesting to mention. I think it sort of found me, if that makes sense. And the last thing I wanted to mention was about value investing, as you mentioned, or fundamental investing, or basing off investing on fundamentals. I mentioned my investment style has changed, and the interesting thing about value investing is there seems to be a lot of empirical evidence that shows quite clearly that value investing is basically impossible. And your chances of consistently outperforming the market, even using people like Charlie Munger's, Warren Buffett's investment methods, is essentially statistically almost impossible. So basically, due to that, my old reason for not investing in stocks was the same as yours, which was that, God, this takes all the time in the world and sort of defeats the purpose of FIRE. I might as well invest in index funds too. Wow, that's not even statistically possible. So that's something that people might want to look into. I understand it's incredibly controversial, etc. But if you look at the data, you'll find that that's essentially what it shows. So that's something I want to talk about, and something I'm going to be talking about on my YouTube channel a lot soon. Because I essentially evidence-based invest, and you might think, well, everyone does that. But if you look at what the evidence does and look at what the majority of people are doing with their investments, e.g. managed funds, you'll quickly find that that is not true. And that's essentially with everything in life. We all like to think we're all very scientific and basing it off evidence, but there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't end up happening. And often it's not due to the individual. Often it's due to people at the top making more money from selling you things that aren't in your best interest.
Nick, thanks so much for making time to come and have a chat with me today. For the listeners, if they want to check out your content or get in touch with you, what's the best way they can find you?
Probably the first way is obviously just Aussie Money Man on YouTube. If you type in Aussie Money Man on Facebook, there's a page. You can message me there. I respond to every comment on the YouTube channel, every message. Aussie Money Man on Instagram. So it's essentially Aussie Money on everything. You can get me on LinkedIn, Nicholas G. Muscat. And I will respond. Obviously, you can hit me up on the form on the website as well, and I will respond.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Captain FI Financial Independence Podcast. To read the transcript or check out the show notes, head over to www.captainfi.com for all the details. If you have a question for the captain, make sure to get in touch. You might even make it on the airwaves. You can reach me online through the Captain Fi contact form or get in touch through the socials. I'm active on Facebook and Instagram, as well as a number of online finance and investing forums. And finally, remember, the information presented on the show and the links provided are for general information purposes only. They should not be taken as constituting professional financial advice. You should always do your own research when making any financial decisions and make sure it's appropriate for your personal circumstance.